If you live on the North Shore or are involved in track and field, there is no doubt you have heard of Harry Jerome, the legendary North Vancouver raised Olympic sprinter. Once considered the fastest man on earth, among the many honors and tributes to him are the Rec Center in central Lonsdale that bears his name, the 9-foot bronze statue of him that graces the Stanley Park seawall in Vancouver, and the Harry Jerome Oval at West Van Secondary. While his achievements on the track are well known, what isn't as well known or talked about is the racism he and his family endured and in some cases still do. It's part of a Black experience in British Columbia that is long gone underreported, at least until recently. Here to talk about races, the trials and triumphs of Canada's fastest family, is Harry's sister and fellow Olympian, Valerie Jerome. Welcome, Valerie.
Thank you very much, John. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for making the time. First off, congratulations on races. It must feel good to finally get it across the finish line, as it were, having started it nearly 40 years ago. What gave you that push to wrap it up after all these years?
Well, I did try to. I finished this manuscript in 1991, so I guess it's more like 30 years ago, but over 30 years ago. I have been trying to get a publisher all of these years, believe it or not. I first submitted it to a publishing company in 1991 when it was first submitted. I've been across the country to Ontario, to some of our very well-established publishing companies, and was told basically they'd never heard of Harry Jerome and it wasn't something that was on their radar. And I returned to BC with meetings, or mostly by letter, I guess, hopes with other companies that they might publish it. And finally, just this last 2 years, a very good friend who's in the film industry actually suggested that we go through his agent, and my very fine agent in Toronto actually did manage to get this to the finish line with Goose Lane Publishing. And I think the fact that George Floyd had died on Canadian television screens, so that Canadians saw that maybe there is something they should concern themselves with, I think that certainly made it possible, because I ended up with 2 offers for publishing just a short while ago. So I'm very, very grateful to this man who paid a very significant price with his life, that he opened the doors for publication for me.
Now, a lot of the book is about growing up with Harry, but as the title implies, he wasn't the only speedy one in the family. You were also an elite track and field athlete in your own right, and your grandfather was Canada's first Black Olympian. I feel this isn't as well known as it should be. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that's true. But, it wasn't even very well known to us as we grew up. Harry and my siblings, and my other siblings, we grew up knowing that, hidden away in the linen closet were these 2 massive silver cups with the name John Armstrong Howard printed on them. But it wasn't something that our mother, although this was, honoring her father, it wasn't something she was terribly proud of. So it was really never talked about. And when we came out into the track world, the odd person who had some knowledge of track and field history in this country mentioned it. And it wasn't until I began working on this manuscript way back in 1991 that friends helped me research a lot of this. A woman at CBC, Joy Sellers, found old newspaper articles for us. Anyway, and then more recently, the Canadian Armed Forces has honored my grandfather, and as has the Manitoba Sport Hall of Fame. So yeah, it was, we weren't even aware of it, never mind the rest of the Canadian population being aware of Army's heroic deeds. Yes.
Progressive politics seems to run in the family as well. You talk about your father leaning that way, your sister Carolyn, one of the militant mothers of Raymer, your son Stuart, a former leader of the BC Green Party. You ran for the Greens as well. What is the common thread there? Is there one?
Well, when you grow up in a very much demeaned community, you've got a bit of struggle in you from the get-go to get the acknowledgement that you often feel you deserve, or to get issues forward that really concern you. I guess that was my dad actually led the way on that. He was a very active member of the CCF, and yes, you feel as though in the same way you want to run and do well to get acknowledgement as an equal human being, you also find that issues that touch on your life, you are able to give voice to. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, let's talk about growing up in North Vancouver. You encountered many instances of racism, from school kids throwing rocks at you and your siblings to even your neighbors drawing up a petition for you to move out of the area. How did your family cope with all this?
Well, actually, they had the petition before we moved into the neighborhood. You know, most properties in Greater Vancouver have got covenants on them saying that you will not sell your property to Blacks, to Asians, to Jews. I mean, these covenants still exist. And what's come about since 1978 is it's illegal to enforce them. So in the part of North Vancouver that we were moving into in 1951, that was a neighborhood, Lower Lonsdale, that did not have covenants. And I guess the people in that community decided, you know, other parts of North Vancouver and the city can keep Blacks from moving in and despoiling their neighborhood. After all, they'd moved all the Indigenous peoples off to reservations, so why not keep these other people out? And so they had a petition on the street. Only one family didn't sign that petition. Muriel Mackenzie was a nurse at North Van General Hospital at the time, and she didn't sign, but the rest of the neighbors did. But City Hall declined their petition. There were no covenants on that property, and we were allowed to move in. And we had not been acutely aware of the effects of that petition until the first day of school, when the four of us, Harry, Carolyn, Barton, and I, attempted to cross 8th Avenue, or 8th Street, pardon me, and go onto the school grounds. And these kids were ready for us. They were ready to do the job that their parents' failed petition had not been successful in doing. So we didn't get onto the school grounds that first day. We turned around, ran home. We were straight across the lane, across 8th Street from the school. And we waited for our dad to come home and, you know, take us across the road and, you know, confront the whole situation a few days later. Yeah.
You also talk about a difficult home life, mainly from your mom, as your dad was away a lot, providing for the family as a railway porter. Is it fair to say athletics, especially for you and Harry, became a form of escape?
Oh, absolutely. Harry had many athletic forms of escape before he landed into track and field. He was a wonderful soccer player and an extremely capable baseball player. That's, I think, where he had hoped to sort of make his way into that sport. He played on football teams. I wasn't one much for going. There weren't sports for girls, unless I guess you were well-to-do enough to join some club, like swimming or gymnastics. So yes, it was a tremendous oasis in our lives. You know, the thing about baseball or crossing the finish line, you know, the results aren't always, you can't dispute them. You know, you're either safe on home base or you're not. And so it was a wonderful experience for both Harry and me to find ourselves with all this joy of freedom, really. Yeah.
As you put it in the book, life made more sense on the playing field.
That's absolutely right. The color of our skin had nothing to do with the result. You know, the measuring tape said the jump was so far, or the stopwatch said whatever. It was a lot more just.
It's almost as well, and you touch on this in the book, that Harry in particular used the difficulties of your upbringing, of your shared upbringing, as a fuel to prove, well, your mom and anyone else who doubted him wrong.
That's right. We weren't just proving things to our classmates and to our neighbors. It was important. Our mother lacked self-confidence tremendously. She never sort of embraced the notion that Army Howard, this Olympian, was her father. Her childhood was really fraught and disturbed by the fact that when her mother remarried after the divorce from Army Howard, Edith, my mother's mother, my grandmother, remarried to a white man, and he did not want anything to do with the three children that were fathered by Army Howard. They were half black. They were something she really, Edith had come from England, had no idea what racism was all about. And when they couldn't rent in Winnipeg when she first arrived with this infant daughter, they had tried living in the small community of St. Rose du Lac. They were sort of, driven from this little village. And so Edith hadn't enjoyed her experience of being married to a black man. And so when she remarried a white man, this man happened to be virulently racist. And he said, your daughters are not, those three daughters are not coming with you into our marriage. And I think it's something that my mother and her sisters never recovered from. I think it was just brutally soul destroying. And yeah, it didn't give her any confidence in being black. If your own mother is prepared to reject you for your color, why wouldn't the rest of the community do the same? So she had her struggles. It was hard for her to be an advocate for color.
Now, Harry starts to find success in the world of track and field, and as remarkable as his achievements were, it sounds like he didn't get an easy ride from the press, particularly the Eastern media. After his injury in Rome, he was labeled a quitter, and you talk about how this affected him. How did this affect him?
Well, it makes you really cautious when somebody's asking you for an interview and you know that they're going to turn it into something that ends up being a diatribe against you. It makes you very, very cautious. When Harry set his first world record in Saskatoon in 1960, I was just mobbed by these newspapermen who rushed up to him, and he wanted to get his sweatsuit on. He wanted to get out of his spikes, and he courteously said, "Can you give me a minute to go?" Well, these white men were not used to we were the only blacks at the meet, number one. They weren't used to the fact that this young black man, or boy as they would have preferred, was saying, "Wait, hold on a minute, I want to put my spikes on." He said it with the utmost of courtesy, but that was a real offense to those men. And it only got worse after that. It was just, they even bragged, some of them, and even members of the Canadian delegation in Rome, the officials who were traveling with the team, were already betting against Harry. Now, can you imagine betting against your own athlete, this 19-year-old young man who had just recently burst onto the scene, had put Canada on the world map of athletics. And it was pretty brutal. It was, heartbreaking, actually.
And for all of his success on the track and over his career, he wasn't immune to racism, even in everyday life. You talk about friends having to step in on his behalf for things like renting a home or getting a table at a restaurant, even.
That's right. There was a lot of it. And as hard as it is for many Canadians possibly to believe, there's still a lot of racism in this community. I've been turned away from restaurants in this city after going to an evening symphony concert, isn't that many years ago, and just told by the restaurateur, "Oh, we don't let women like you in here," assuming that all, I've sat on a bus and listened to people, belittling me, and nobody on the bus having the guts to stand up and ask these men to either shut up or get off the bus or something. It's still happening out there. It's certainly not as pervasive. I have a young friend, he's a world-renowned dancer, and he knows when he comes to Vancouver, this is the one city, and he lives in Los Angeles. He's lived in the Netherlands, he's lived in Germany, but when he comes here to dance, he knows this is the one city he's probably going to be called nigger on the streets of Vancouver. So this is a last year's story. This isn't 30 and 40 years ago. So I'm one of the impetuses for this wanting to get this book out is I think Canadians really don't know who they are. This has been a country where so much has been so acceptable, and racism happens south of the 49th parallel. In the United States, it's not here. As one of the chapters in the book is prefaced with a quote from James Baldwin, which is, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. And one of my motives in writing this book and wanting it to be out there is that I hope Canadians could start to take a look at themselves and face it so that we can change it.
Your brother Harry passed away at the age of 42 in 1982, and it seems like many of his accolades, and he had many in his as he was when he was alive, but it seems many of them came posthumously. Do you think he was adequately recognized in life? Did he feel that way?
Well, he felt that way because he was always reaching out to young people and children. I do know that in Canada, he never got the top athletic award, even the years that he set world records. And yet many other fellow competitors who didn't have nearly the success that he did were able to, garner the National Press Award for being Canada's outstanding athletes. But he wasn't always, looking for, he did want to see people's achievements honored, and he really wanted to see Percy Williams' achievements honored. He was heartbroken that Empire Stadium, which had been promised to Percy Williams to be named for him, never was named for Percy Williams. That man had won 2 gold medals in the 1928 Olympics, and although he turned the sod for the construction, the start of construction of Empire Stadium, he was just soon swept aside. And certainly this notion of empire and British Columbia and all of the history that we learned in school that was totally related to, Britain, it's super important to British Columbians, and it still is to this day. And so for Percy Williams' name, and he was a white man, but for his acknowledgements to go unmarked, was very sad in Harry's eyes.
You tell the story as well, speaking of Empire Stadium, you tell the story of Harry tossing aside a book about the history of Empire Stadium when it failed to mention him setting the world record in 1962. And the quote is, "Oh, well, that's what Canadians do with their heroes." Have we gotten any better at honoring our heroes?
Oh, I can't really say. I think to some degree we have. I certainly don't think the press is allowed to run roughshod over them. I think that we're putting people in the management end of our track and field and perhaps other sports teams to honor and acknowledge the achievements of our athletes. I think most Canadians now are extraordinarily proud of Andre Degrassi and Marco Arup and our decathletes, and this young woman who just recently won the hammer in the World Championships. I think that Canadians, perhaps, well, they certainly do in hockey, they honor them no matter what. But I think for other sports, I think it is improving, yes.
Some of the warmest, most moving moments in the book are when you talk about family times with Harry, especially how close the two of you were. What is something about your brother that biographers have missed over the years?
Well, I think Harry really cared about other young people coming along. He really nurtured me. I was not at all athletic. I would go out and, when he and his friends were playing scrub baseball, I'd go out there and, fetch the fielders and, try to hurl them into home plate as fast as I could. But I wasn't. He really he cared about opportunities for girls in sport. When the years that he worked in Ottawa, he helped start the soccer leagues there to get young people involved. And recently I learned the story of the brother of Lorna Williams is a well-known linguist in this province. And when I first met her, she said, my brother, way back in the 60s, came down from Mount Currie to run the track meet at Brockton Oval. Certainly the only Indigenous person at that track meet, Harry and I, amongst the very few Black people at the meet. Anyway, Harry was jogging around doing his warm-up, and he came across this young kid sitting by himself, probably trying to get up his nerve to start his warm-up, jogging in the infield. And Harry sat and talked to him for more than an hour, gave him hints on his warm-up and how to run his races. And then Harry patted him on the shoulder and wished him good luck, and away he went to do, what he had to do at the meet. Harry really cared about getting other people to enjoy what he found to be a marvelous experience for much of his athletic career. And it was such a gift to us. It was, as I said in a recent interview, it was like magic. We left the unhappiness. We went to this track practice and just reveled in the good friends that we had there and the workouts and the freedom that you can't get from releasing all this pent up tension and fright. And I was full of fright. So for me, it was a really great release.
And finally, Valerie, what do you hope the reader gets out of learning your family story?
Well, I just hope that people will be more willing to embrace people who don't necessarily look like them. I'm just hoping that people can find our humanity in that story. I know for me, even writing it and thinking about, my biggest fear in life was always my mother, believe it or not. And she remained that way right until her death. So there was lots of fright. And I think that, people who have read the book so far, I keep wanting to say manuscript because I can never quite believe it's published. I think that I'd like people to see that we're human and experience all the same emotional ups and downs, the joy and pain that everybody's life is touched with. I guess humanity is what I'm looking for in the reader's response. Recognized humanity.
The name of the book is Races, The Trials and Triumphs of Canada's Fastest Family. It's available from Goose Lane Editions. My thanks to author Valerie Jerome.
Thank you very much.